The sound of sneakers squeaking against polished floors echoed through the crowded hallways of Crestwood High. Students rushed to their classes, laughing and shouting, their chatter filling the air with an unrelenting hum. Somewhere in the chaos, Lucy Stevens moved like a ghost, unnoticed and unimportant, clutching her worn-out backpack tightly against her chest. Her long brown hair fell like a curtain around her pale face, shielding her from prying eyes. She kept her head down, her steps small and quick as though trying to disappear entirely. She wasn't the kind of girl people remembered, quiet, reserved, and always seated at the back of the classroom. If not for the bullies, she might have faded into the background completely. "Watch where you're going, loser," a loud voice jeered, snapping Lucy out of her thoughts. Before she could react, her books were knocked out of her arms, scattering across the hallway floor. Laughter erupted around her as Shawn Carter, the school's golden boy, leaned casually against a nearby locker, his signature smirk firmly in place. His emerald green eyes sparkled with amusement as he watched her scramble to gather her belongings. "Oops," he said mockingly, holding up his hands in faux apology. "Didn't see you there, Stevens. You're just so small." The crowd roared with laughter, feeding off Shawn's cruel charisma. Lucy's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she refused to let the tears forming in her eyes spill. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on the floor, ignoring the snickers and whispers around her. "Leave her alone, Shawn," a girl from the crowd muttered, but her voice was barely audible over the commotion. Shawn ignored the half-hearted protest, his smirk widening as he crouched down to pick up one of Lucy's notebooks. He flipped through it carelessly, his eyebrows rising when he saw a sketch of a willow tree on one of the pages. "What's this?" "Some sad little doodle," he taunted, holding it up for everyone to see. "Are you trying to be an artist or something, Stevens? Or is this how you plan to cry yourself to sleep at night?" The laughter around them grew louder, sharper, each cruel word cutting into Lucy like a blade. She lunged forward, snatching the notebook from his hands with more force than she thought she had. "Don't touch my stuff," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Shawn raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by her feeble attempt at defiance. "Oh, feisty today, are we? I like it when you fight back, Stevens. Makes it more fun." "Come on, Shawn," another voice called from the group. "Let's go. Coach is going to kill us if we're late for practice." With one last smirk, Shawn straightened up, towering over Lucy as he looked down at her. "Later, loser," he said casually before turning and walking away, his entourage following close behind. As the hallway cleared, Lucy stayed crouched on the floor, clutching her notebook tightly to her chest. Her heart raced, her breathing shallow as she fought to steady herself. She hated this, hated being invisible and yet somehow always the target. Gathering the last of her things, she rose to her feet and hurried to class, avoiding eye contact with anyone she passed. No one would check on her. No one ever did. Sinking into her usual seat at the back of the classroom, Lucy let out a shaky breath. She opened her notebook to the page Shawn had seen, staring at the willow tree she had sketched the night before. It was a safe place in her mind, a sanctuary she escaped to when the world became too much. But even that felt tainted now. As the teacher began the lesson, Lucy stared out the window, her mind wandering. She told herself she'd survive this like she always did. One more day. One more battle. But deep down she couldn't shake the feeling that the weight on her shoulders was growing heavier, threatening to crush her entirely. The sound of a football slamming into the practice field echoed across Crestwood High's stadium. Shawn Carter stood at the center, his confident smirk plastered on his face as his teammates cheered him on. The late afternoon sun glinted off his sweat-dampened hair, making him look every bit the golden boy he was. Shawn lived for this. The rush of adrenaline, the adoration of the crowd, and the thrill of knowing he was untouchable. His position as captain of the football team only solidified his status as the king of the school. Teachers turned a blind eye to his antics, and students either worshipped or feared him. To Shawn, that was exactly how things should be. "Carter!" Coach yelled from the sidelines, his voice booming. "Quit showboating and focus on the damn play." Shawn saluted mockingly before turning back to his teammates, laughing. "Relax, coach. I've got this." He always had it. Whether it was on the field or in the halls, Shawn ruled with an iron fist wrapped in charm. His teammates loved him, his girlfriends worshipped him, and the rest of the school either envied or dreaded him. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the game, the thrill, and the way the world seemed to bow to his every whim. After practice, Shawn slung his duffel bag over his shoulder and made his way toward the locker room, trailed by his best friend Jake. "Dude, did you see Steven's face today?" Jake said with a laugh. "Priceless. She looked like she was about to cry." Shawn chuckled, the memory of Lucy's stricken expression flashing through his mind. "She's too easy, man. It's like she's begging to be messed with." Jake grinned. "You're ruthless, bro. But hey, whatever keeps things entertaining around here." Shawn shrugged as they entered the locker room, the smell of sweat and damp fabric filling the air. "Someone's gotta keep it interesting. She's just..." He paused, searching for the word. "Convenient." But as he said it, something nagged at the back of his mind. He'd seen plenty of reactions from people he teased: anger, embarrassment, even defiance. But Lucy's silence, the way she simply absorbed the blows without fighting back, unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite put into words. He shook the thought away. It didn't matter. People like Lucy Stevens were meant to be stepped on. It was the natural order of things. After showering and changing, Shawn headed to the parking lot, where his sleek black car waited. A crowd of admirers lingered nearby, hoping to catch his attention. He flashed them his signature smirk as he slid into the driver's seat, revving the engine loudly before speeding off. The drive home was short, taking him to the sprawling Carter estate on the edge of town. As he pulled up to the massive house, he noticed the manicured lawns and pristine facade, a stark contrast to the chaos of his life. Inside, the house was eerily quiet as always. His parents were away on yet another business trip, leaving Shawn to his own devices. He didn't mind. The freedom to do whatever he wanted was a luxury most kids his age could only dream of. Dropping his bag in the foyer, Shawn grabbed a soda from the fridge and collapsed onto the plush couch in the living room. He flipped through channels absent-mindedly, his mind wandering back to Lucy. There was something about her that stuck with him. Her small frame, the way her eyes darted nervously, and that look of quiet defeat she wore like a second skin. It was almost unsettling. Shawn frowned, annoyed with himself for even thinking about her. She was just another nobody in the grand scheme of things, someone who didn't matter. Yet for reasons he couldn't explain, she lingered in his thoughts. "Whatever," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. He had a party to plan for the weekend and more important things to think about than some shy girl who couldn't stand up for herself. But as the night stretched on and the house remained silent, that nagging feeling didn't go away. For the first time in a long time, Shawn Carter couldn't fully enjoy his throne. The cafeteria was its usual cacophony of clattering trays, loud chatter, and bursts of laughter. Students filled the space in their respective cliques, like puzzle pieces that fit neatly into the social hierarchy of Crestwood High. At the center of it all sat Shawn Carter, flanked by his usual entourage. His booming laugh echoed as he recounted a story from the weekend's party, his charm on full display. Lucy Stevens, seated alone at the farthest corner of the room, picked at her sandwich, hoping to blend into the walls. The noise was overwhelming, but it was better than the silence of eating in the library, where loneliness felt even more oppressive. Across the room, Shawn's gaze flicked toward her. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was habit, or maybe something about her still bothered him. She looked even smaller today, her shoulders hunched as though the weight of the world had physically diminished her. Jake noticed Shawn's wandering eyes and smirked. "You thinking about round 2 with Stevens? I've got a few ideas if you need inspiration." Shawn's grin faltered, but he masked it quickly. "Nah," he said, leaning back in his chair. "She's not worth the effort today." "Losing your edge, Carter?" one of the others teased. Shawn rolled his eyes. "Please. I could mess with her anytime. It's just too easy." The table erupted in laughter, but Shawn's attention drifted back to Lucy. She stood abruptly, dumping her half-eaten lunch in the trash before leaving the cafeteria. Her retreat should have felt like a victory, but instead, it left an unfamiliar heaviness in Shawn's chest. Later that day, Shawn found himself wandering the quieter side of campus, where the art classrooms and studios were located. He wasn't sure why he was there. It wasn't his usual territory. But as he passed one of the open doors, he caught a glimpse of Lucy inside, seated at a table with her sketchpad open. He stopped, leaning against the doorway as he watched her. Her pencil moved deftly across the page, creating intricate details that brought the image of a bird mid-flight to life. Her face was relaxed, her usual tension replaced by a rare look of peace. Shawn cleared his throat, stepping inside. Didn't take you for an artist, Stevens. Lucy's head snapped up, her eyes widening in alarm. She quickly closed her sketchpad as though trying to shield it from him. What do you want? She asked, her voice wary. He shrugged, pretending to be nonchalant. Just passing through. Didn't know you had talents. It's none of your business, she said, standing up and shoving the sketchpad into her bag. Shawn watched her, an odd mixture of amusement and guilt stirring inside him. Relax. I'm not here to mess with you. Lucy scoffed, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Sure you're not. That's all you ever do. Her words hit harder than he expected, and for a moment he was at a loss. Before he could respond, she brushed past him, her small frame rigid with tension. Stevens, he called after her. She stopped but didn't turn around. I'm sorry, he said, the words foreign and awkward on his tongue. Lucy froze, clearly shocked. After a moment, she turned her head slightly, just enough to glance at him over her shoulder. Her eyes were wary, skeptical, but there was something else there too. A flicker of vulnerability. Without a word, she walked away, leaving Shawn standing alone in the quiet hallway. For the first time in his life, Shawn Carter felt small. The cracks in his carefully crafted facade were beginning to show, and he wasn't sure he liked what lay beneath. Lucy's footsteps echoed through the empty art room as she entered after school, her sanctuary in the chaos of her life. She shut the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. Her hands were still trembling from the encounter with Shawn earlier that day. She hated that he could get under her skin so easily. No matter how much she tried to stay invisible, he always found a way to single her out, to remind her how small and powerless she felt. Taking a deep breath, Lucy sat at her usual table and opened her sketchpad. The half-finished drawing of the stormy ocean stared back at her. With trembling fingers, she began adding darker shades, her strokes harsher than usual. Each line felt like an outlet for the frustration and pain bottled inside her. But even here in her safe space, she couldn't escape him. The door creaked open and her heart sank. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Still hiding in here, Stevens? Shawn's voice was casual, but there was an edge to it, as if he wasn't entirely sure why he had come. Lucy didn't respond. She kept her eyes on her sketchpad, hoping he would get bored and leave. Silent treatment, huh? Shawn leaned against a nearby table, his smirk faltering when she still didn't acknowledge him. Why are you here? Lucy finally asked, her voice low but steady. Shawn shrugged. Just curious. You stormed off earlier like a little tornado. Thought I'd check on you. She laughed bitterly, her pencil pausing mid-stroke. Check on me? That's rich coming from you. Her words caught him off guard. For a moment, Shawn didn't have a witty comeback. He shoved his hands into his pockets, feeling uncharacteristically uneasy. Look, he said, trying to sound casual, you're too sensitive. I'm just messing around. You shouldn't take it so seriously. Lucy snapped her sketchpad shut and stood, glaring at him. Messing around? Do you even hear yourself? You humiliate me in front of everyone, you tear me down for fun, and you think it's just a joke? What's wrong with you? Shawn blinked, stunned by her outburst. He wasn't used to people standing up to him, least of all Lucy. He began, but the words didn't come. Lucy didn't wait for him to respond. She grabbed her bag and moved toward the door, her anger giving her the strength to push past him. But before she could leave, Shawn reached out and gently grabbed her arm. Wait, he said, his voice softer. I didn't mean to. To what? Lucy snapped, pulling her arm free. Make me feel like garbage? Newsflash, Shawn. You succeed at that every single day. Her words hung in the air like a slap, and for the first time Shawn didn't have a smug reply. He watched as she stormed out, the door slamming shut behind her. Shawn stayed in the art room long after Lucy left, staring at the scattered pencils and scraps of paper on the table. Something about her words hit deeper than he wanted to admit. For years he had perfected the art of being untouchable. He wore his arrogance like armor, keeping the world at bay. But Lucy's outburst chipped away at that armor, leaving him exposed in a way that made him uncomfortable. Why did he even care? She was just another target, another nobody in the grand scheme of things. But as much as he tried to convince himself of that, he couldn't shake the image of her angry, tear-filled eyes. For the first time in a long time, Shawn Carter felt something he wasn't used to, guilt. And he hated it. The whispers started the next morning, spreading like wildfire through the halls of Crestwood High. Did you hear about Lucy Stevens snapping at Shawn yesterday? Yeah. She told him off right in the art room. Can you believe that? Man, Shawn must be losing his touch. Shawn Carter stood by his locker, listening to the hushed voices with growing irritation. His jaw clenched as he slammed his locker shut. Looks like Stevens has people talking, Jake said, leaning against the lockers with his usual cocky grin. Word's out that you finally got put in your place. Shawn shot him a glare. Shut up, Jake. Jake laughed. What's the matter? Getting soft. Shawn didn't answer. He stalked down the hallway, his mood darker than usual. The stares and smirks from other students only fueled his frustration. For years he had ruled this school without challenge. Now Lucy Stevens, the shy, quiet girl he barely thought about, had managed to put a dent in his reputation. Meanwhile, Lucy kept her head down, ignoring the attention she had inadvertently drawn. Her outburst in the art room was a moment of uncharacteristic bravery, but now she regretted it. Confronting Shawn had felt like standing in the path of an oncoming train, and she was terrified of the fallout. As she walked to her next class, a group of Shawn's friends blocked her path. Hey Stevens, one of them sneered. Heard you think you're a big shot now, mouthing off to Shawn like that. Lucy's heart pounded, but she forced herself to meet their gaze. I just want to get to class, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Ah, don't be like that, another one said. You're the talk of the school. Maybe we should help you keep that spotlight. Before they could say more, Shawn appeared behind them, his expression unreadable. Back off, he said, his tone cold. The group exchanged surprised glances. We're just messing with her, one of them said. I said back off, Shawn repeated, his voice firmer. Reluctantly, they moved aside, grumbling under their breath. Lucy stared at Shawn, her confusion clear. Why was he stopping them? Shawn looked at her for a long moment, his usual smirk nowhere to be seen. Go to class, Stevens, he said quietly. Lucy didn't need to be told twice. She hurried past him, her heart racing. For the rest of the day, Shawn couldn't shake the memory of Lucy's tear-filled eyes and trembling voice. He found himself replaying her words over and over, each one cutting deeper than he wanted to admit. That evening, as he sat in his car in the school parking lot, he thought about why he had stepped in earlier. He didn't know what had come over him. For years, tormenting people like Lucy had been second nature. But now it felt wrong. He sighed, leaning his head against the steering wheel. For the first time in his life, Shawn Carter wasn't sure who he was anymore. And it scared him more than he was willing to admit. Lucy sat on her bed that evening, staring at the ceiling of her small, cluttered bedroom. The events of the day replayed in her mind like a broken record. Shawn stepping in to stop his friends had thrown her completely off balance. Why had he done that? For years he had been her tormentor, the person who made every day at Crestwood High unbearable. Yet today, for the first time, he hadn't added to her misery. Instead, he'd stopped others from doing so. She hated the flicker of confusion and curiosity it stirred in her chest. Shawn Carter was a bully, plain and simple. She couldn't let herself believe otherwise. Shaking her head, she picked up her sketchpad, flipping through the pages. Drawing was her escape, her way of untangling the mess of emotions she couldn't put into words. She settled on a blank page and began sketching the oak tree where she often sat during lunch, adding shadows and intricate details to distract herself from the lingering thoughts of Shawn. Meanwhile, across town, Shawn sat alone in his lavish bedroom, the expensive decor doing little to comfort him. He stared at the glowing screen of his phone, the group chat with his friends filling with jokes and plans for the weekend. He couldn't bring himself to reply. He tossed the phone onto his bed and leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his messy hair. His mind kept drifting to Lucy, her anger, her tears, and the weight behind her words. He hadn't thought much about the consequences of his actions before. Teasing people, pushing boundaries, it had all seemed harmless. But seeing Lucy's reaction yesterday had been a wake-up call. For the first time, he wondered how many others had felt the same way because of him. The thought made his chest tighten in a way he wasn't used to. The next day at school, Lucy tried her best to avoid Shawn. She didn't want to give him a chance to ruin her fragile sense of peace. But it seemed like fate had other plans. During lunch, as she sat under her usual oak tree, Shawn appeared, hands shoved in his pockets and an uncertain expression on his face. What do you want, Shawn? Lucy asked, her voice wary. He hesitated, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. Can I sit? Lucy blinked, caught off guard. Why? I just need to talk, he said, his voice unusually quiet. She studied him for a moment, searching for the usual smirk or mocking tone, but they were absent. Against her better judgment, she nodded. Shawn sat a few feet away, the silence between them heavy and awkward. For a moment he didn't say anything, just stared at the grass. I wanted to apologize, he said finally, his voice low. Lucy froze, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. Apologize? For what? Making my life a living hell? Shawn flinched at her words but nodded. Yeah. For that. For everything. She stared at him, her disbelief evident. Why now? After all this time, why would you suddenly care? Shawn sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. I guess. I never really thought about how it affected you. Or anyone else for that matter. That's an understatement, Lucy said bitterly, clutching her sketchpad tighter. You humiliated me, Shawn. Over and over again. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? No, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But I think I'm starting to understand. Lucy shook her head, standing up. You don't get to just apologize and expect everything to be okay. It doesn't work like that. I know, Shawn said, standing as well. But I want to try. To make things right. She laughed bitterly. Make things right? You think you can fix years of torment with a few words? I don't know, he said honestly. But I have to try. Lucy stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and something she couldn't quite name. I don't trust you, she said finally. I don't blame you, Shawn replied. She turned to leave, her heart pounding. But as she walked away, a small part of her couldn't help but wonder if he was sincere. That night, Shawn sat on his bed, replaying the conversation in his head. He knew earning Lucy's trust wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in his life he felt like doing something good, something real. He didn't know why Lucy mattered to him now, but she did. And he was determined to figure out why, no matter how long it took. The days following Shawn's apology were some of the strangest Lucy had ever experienced. For the first time in years, she wasn't entirely on edge when walking through the school hallways. Shawn seemed to keep his distance, and his usual crew didn't bother her as much. Still, she wasn't ready to let her guard down. Trusting Shawn Carter felt like inviting a wolf into the sheepfold. He may have apologized, but words didn't undo years of torment. Her doubts about his sincerity only deepened when she noticed him watching her from across the cafeteria one afternoon. He wasn't sitting with his usual boisterous crowd but at a table in the corner, seemingly alone. His piercing blue eyes tracked her movements, and it made her stomach churn. What's his deal? Lucy muttered to herself, hurrying to her usual spot under the oak tree. Shawn leaned back in his chair, his gaze following Lucy as she exited the cafeteria. He couldn't shake the guilt that had settled over him like a storm cloud. It wasn't just about Lucy anymore. The way he'd treated people, how he'd used his popularity as a weapon, was beginning to weigh on him in a way he didn't know how to handle. Yo, Shawn. Jake's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. Jake and the others sauntered over, dropping their trays on the table. What's up with you lately? Jake asked, shoving a fry into his mouth. You've been acting weird. And why'd you stop us from messing with Stevens the other day? You're going soft, man. Shawn's jaw tightened. Maybe I'm just tired of the same old crap, he said flatly. Jake laughed, nudging him. Tired? Bro, making Stevens squirm is like your favorite thing. Don't tell me you're growing a conscience. Shawn pushed his chair back abruptly and stood. Maybe I am. The table fell silent as Shawn walked away, leaving his friends confused and more than a little uneasy. Lucy's sanctuary under the oak tree was short-lived. She had just settled in when she heard footsteps approaching. Looking up, she saw Shawn standing a few feet away, his hands shoved in his pockets. What do you want now? She asked, her voice sharper than she intended. I'm not here to bother you, Shawn said, holding up his hands in a gesture of surrender. I wanted to say something. Lucy crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. What could you possibly have to say that I'd want to hear? Shawn hesitated, the usual cocky smirk absent. I've been thinking about what you said. About how I've hurt you. And you're right. I've been a total ass. Lucy raised an eyebrow. Wow, self-awareness. Didn't think you had it in you. I deserve that, Shawn said, managing a small rueful smile. Look, I'm not asking for forgiveness or anything. I want to change. And I wanted you to know that. She studied him, searching for any trace of sarcasm or ulterior motive, but his expression was open and sincere. It made her uneasy. Why now? She asked. Why do you suddenly care? Shawn shifted uncomfortably. Because for the first time I'm starting to realize how much damage I've done. To you, to other people. And I don't want to be that guy anymore. Lucy frowned, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to believe him, but another part screamed that it was just another one of his games. I don't trust you, she said finally. And I don't think I ever will. Shawn nodded as if he had expected that. I get it. But I'm still going to try to be better. Even if you never believe me. He turned to leave but paused after a few steps. By the way, your sketches are amazing. The one with the ocean? It's incredible. Lucy blinked, caught off guard. By the time she found her voice, Shawn was already walking away. Over the next few weeks, Lucy couldn't help but notice the changes in Shawn. He stopped hanging out with his usual crowd as much, and he seemed less eager to be the center of attention. More importantly, he left her alone. No more taunts, no more cruel pranks. It was almost as if he had disappeared from her life entirely. But as much as she wanted to pretend she didn't care, she couldn't stop herself from wondering if he was truly changing. Or if this was just the calm before the storm. Shawn, meanwhile, found himself increasingly isolated. His old friends didn't understand his sudden shift, and he didn't have the energy to explain it to them. One evening, as he sat alone in his car, staring out at the empty school parking lot, he thought about how much easier it had been when he didn't care. When he could bury his insecurities beneath layers of arrogance and cruelty. But now the cracks in his facade were too wide to ignore. And for the first time he wasn't sure who he was anymore. The only thing he knew for certain was that he owed Lucy Stevens more than just an apology. He owed her proof that he could be better. And he was determined to give her that, no matter how long it took. Lucy stared at her reflection in the mirror, her hands gripping the edge of the sink. She looked tired, the dark circles under her eyes betraying how little sleep she had gotten. The memory of Shawn's apology replayed in her mind over and over again. Why now? She muttered to herself. It didn't make sense. Shawn Carter wasn't the type to apologize, he was the type to smirk and double down. But something about his tone, his eyes, had made her pause. She shook her head, brushing the thoughts away. People like Shawn didn't change. He was just playing another game and she wouldn't be his pawn. At school, the atmosphere around Shawn had shifted. People noticed the change in him. He wasn't as loud or cocky, and he wasn't leading his group of friends in their usual antics. The hallways buzzed with whispers. Is Shawn different? He's been so quiet lately. Maybe he finally grew up. Shawn ignored the murmurs, focusing instead on keeping his head down. His friends weren't thrilled with his behavior. What's going on with you, man? Jake demanded as they walked toward the lockers. You're not fun anymore. You barely talk to us and you're just off. Shawn shrugged. Maybe I'm tired of being an asshole. Jake laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Shawn's serious expression silenced him. You're kidding, right? Shawn turned to face him. Do I look like I'm kidding? I've been a jerk, Jake. To a lot of people. I don't want to be that guy anymore. Jake stared at him, his confusion morphing into disdain. You're serious? Wow, I don't even know who you are anymore. Maybe you never did, Shawn said, slamming his locker shut and walking away. Lucy sat under the oak tree during lunch, her sketchpad open but untouched. She was lost in thought, replaying the events of the past few weeks. She had noticed Shawn's absence in the hallways. He no longer lingered with his friends, laughing at others' expense. And when she caught him glancing her way, there was no malice in his gaze, just something she couldn't quite decipher. Mind if I sit? Lucy jumped, looking up to find Shawn standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets. Seriously, she said, her voice sharp. What is this, Shawn? Some new way to mess with me? No, he said quickly, his tone earnest. I wanted to talk. Lucy folded her arms, glaring at him. You already said your piece. What more do you want? Shawn hesitated before sitting down a few feet away, keeping his distance. I know you don't trust me, and I get that. I don't deserve your trust. But I want you to know I'm trying. Trying to what? Redeem yourself? Lucy scoffed. You think you can erase years of bullying with a few kind words? It doesn't work like that. I know, Shawn said, his voice quiet. I'm not trying to erase anything. I can't. But I can stop being the person who made your life miserable. That's all I'm trying to do. Lucy stared at him, searching his face for any hint of insincerity. She hated that he looked so genuine, so vulnerable. Why? She asked finally. Why are you doing this? Shawn ran a hand through his hair, exhaling deeply. Because I'm tired of pretending. I've been hiding behind this persona for so long, I don't even know who I am anymore. But I know I don't want to be the guy who hurt you. Or anyone else. Lucy's heart twisted at his words, but she refused to let herself feel sympathy for him. She couldn't. Not after everything he had put her through. I don't know if I believe you, she said, her voice softer now. I don't blame you, Shawn said, standing up. But I'll keep trying anyway. He turned to leave, but before he walked away, he glanced over his shoulder. By the way, you're really talented. Your sketches, they're amazing. Lucy watched him go, her emotions a chaotic mess. She didn't know what to make of Shawn's sudden change, but part of her hated that she wanted to believe him. That night, Lucy sat at her desk, staring at her sketchpad. Her pencil hovered over the page as she thought about Shawn's words. She began to draw, her lines slow and deliberate. As the image took shape, she realized she was sketching the oak tree. But this time there was someone sitting under it. A boy with messy hair and an uncertain expression. Lucy frowned, tearing the page out of her sketchpad and crumpling it. She wasn't ready to forgive Shawn Carter. But she couldn't deny that he was starting to chip away at the walls she had built around herself. And that scared her more than anything. The next day at school, Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She had always been good at maintaining her distance from people, keeping everyone at arm's length, especially those like Shawn. But now, despite her best efforts, it felt like something was changing between them. She kept to her usual routine, avoiding Shawn's gaze in the hallways and focusing on her classes. But there was something about him that lingered in the back of her mind. He had been persistent in his efforts to be a different person, and for the first time she wasn't sure if she could keep ignoring him. At lunch, Lucy sat under the oak tree as usual, sketching and trying to push the thoughts of Shawn out of her mind. The weather had turned warmer, the air fresh and filled with the smell of spring. The gentle rustle of leaves in the wind helped calm her nerves, but it didn't last long. Hey. She looked up, startled. It was Shawn, standing a few feet away as usual, hands in his pockets. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Seriously, what now? Lucy asked, her voice a little harsher than she intended. Shawn didn't back off though. He took a step forward, sitting down on the grass a little further than the last time. I'm not here to bother you, he said softly. I've been thinking about what you said the other day. Lucy stiffened, closing her sketchbook slowly. You don't need to apologize again. I've already told you I don't trust you. Shawn nodded slowly, his eyes sincere. I know. And I'm not asking for your trust. But I'm asking for a chance. Just a chance to prove that I can be better. Lucy exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. I don't even know what you want from me, Shawn. You want forgiveness? You want me to just forget everything and pretend it didn't happen? No, he said quickly, his voice almost pleading. I don't expect you to forget. But I want to show you that I'm trying to change. That I'm not that person anymore. That's all I'm asking for. She looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. For a moment she almost believed him. Why now though? She asked quietly, her voice softer. Why the sudden change of heart? Shawn hesitated, looking away. He seemed lost in thought for a moment before meeting her gaze again. I don't know. Maybe it's because I've been living in this bubble of arrogance and privilege, and I never stopped to think about the consequences of my actions. But I see things differently now. I don't want to be the guy who hurts people anymore. Especially you. Lucy swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing. She didn't want to care. She didn't want to feel anything for him. But she could feel something shifting inside her. A softening, a vulnerability she hadn't allowed herself to experience in years. I can't just forget Shawn, she said, her voice trembling a little. It's not that simple. I know, he said, his voice gentle. I don't expect you to. But I hope that, over time, maybe you'll see that I mean it. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to fix what I broke. Lucy sat in silence for a long moment, her eyes on the ground. She felt like her entire world had been upended. For so long Shawn had been the villain in her story, the one who made every day harder than it needed to be. And now he was asking for a chance. "I don't know if I can believe you yet," Lucy finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not going to shut you out completely." Shawn's face softened, a small, grateful smile tugging at his lips. "That's all I'm asking for." Over the next few weeks, things between Lucy and Shawn continued to shift in strange and subtle ways. He kept his distance, respecting her space, but he made small efforts to show her that he was serious about changing. He didn't join in with his old friends' teasing anymore, and he even helped a few of her classmates with homework when they asked, something the old Shawn would never have done. Lucy found herself watching him more than she wanted to admit, noting the way he carried himself now. There was a quiet humility to him that hadn't been there before, and it made her question everything she had believed about him. One afternoon after school she found herself at the edge of the football field, leaning against the fence. It was a quiet moment. Most of the other students had already left for the day. She wasn't sure why she was there, but she couldn't stop herself from glancing over at the bleachers where Shawn was practicing with the team. Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard footsteps approaching from behind. She turned to find Shawn walking toward her, his expression serious but not unkind. "Hey," he said softly, stopping a few feet away. "I thought I'd find you here." Lucy raised an eyebrow. "You've been watching me?" Shawn shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I don't know. Maybe. But I was hoping you'd stick around for a minute. I want to show you something." Lucy was about to protest when she saw the earnestness in his eyes. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Hey, what is it?" Shawn reached into his bag and pulled out a sketchbook. It looked almost identical to hers. "I've been drawing," he said, holding it out to her. "It's not much, but I thought you might appreciate it." Lucy stared at him, her heart thudding in her chest. Without a word, she took the sketchbook from his hands. She flipped it open, revealing page after page of sketches, each one more intricate than the last. They were landscapes, portraits, and abstract designs, each one reflecting a side of Shawn that she never thought he had. When she reached the last page, she froze. It was a drawing of the oak tree, the one where she often sat during lunch, with the faint outline of a person sitting under it. Lucy felt a lump form in her throat. "I've been trying to see things differently," Shawn said quietly, watching her. "Maybe this is a start." Lucy didn't know what to say. The vulnerability in his gesture took her by surprise. She closed the sketchbook gently and looked up at him, her chest tight. "I don't know what this means," she said slowly, "but thank you." Shawn smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "It means everything." For the first time, Lucy allowed herself to consider that maybe, just maybe, there was more to Shawn Carter than she had ever imagined. Lucy woke up early the next morning, a strange feeling bubbling in her chest. She had hardly slept the night before, her thoughts still tangled in everything that had happened with Shawn. His drawings, his words, his sincerity. Everything was so unlike the Shawn she had known. She found herself torn between disbelief and the small, stubborn hope that maybe this time was different. The whole day felt out of sync. Lucy couldn't concentrate in class, couldn't focus on anything except the distant memory of Shawn's sketchbook and the quiet way he had shared it with her. She had never seen this side of him before. It was as if he had peeled back the layers, revealing something raw and fragile. Her friends noticed the change in her too. "You okay, Luce?" Sarah asked as they sat at lunch. "You've been awfully quiet today." Lucy picked at her food, her mind racing. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind." Sarah narrowed her eyes, a hint of concern crossing her face. "It's about Shawn, isn't it?" Lucy's heart skipped a beat. "What? No." Sarah wasn't convinced. "Come on, I've seen the way you've been looking at him lately. He's not your usual target anymore, huh?" Lucy flushed, the color rising in her cheeks. "It's not like that," she insisted, even though she wasn't sure anymore. "I mean, if you're not mad about the stuff he did to you, it's okay," Sarah said, trying to sound casual. "But just, don't get hurt, okay? He's not exactly known for being a good guy." Lucy swallowed, nodding. I know, Sarah. It's just, everything's different now." The following days were a mix of quiet tension and tentative steps forward. Lucy tried to keep her distance from Shawn, but every time they crossed paths, there was something new, something subtle but unmistakable. He would smile at her from across the hallway, or hold the door open when he saw her coming, small gestures that had once been foreign coming from him. But Lucy's heart was still a fortress. Even as his behavior shifted, the years of torment, the echoes of his cruel words, were not so easily erased. One afternoon as she walked out of the library, she ran into him again. He was standing by the lockers, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking uncharacteristically unsure of himself. "Hey," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of nervousness and hope. "You have a minute?" Lucy froze, unsure of how to respond. She felt the familiar walls rising again, but something in his voice, something in the way he looked at her, made her hesitate. "Sure," she said, her voice tight. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know things have been weird between us, but I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to, I don't know, hang out sometime? Just the two of us." Lucy blinked, taken aback. This was a new territory. She had never once thought she'd be standing here, having this conversation with Shawn Carter. "I don't know, Shawn," she said, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that. I mean, we're not exactly friends, are we?" His expression faltered, but he quickly masked it with a smile. "I get it. I don't know, I feel like I owe you more than just an apology. I want to be different. If you'll let me show you that." Lucy felt a strange pull in her chest, the vulnerability in his words unsettling. She had never expected to be in this position. This place between old grudges and new possibilities. "I can't promise anything, Shawn," she said slowly, her voice unsure. "But I'm willing to see where this goes. As long as you don't think this is some happy ending right away." He nodded eagerly, as if her words were the green light he'd been waiting for. "I get it. I'm not asking for anything from you except for the chance to prove that I've changed. No pressure, I promise." That evening, Lucy couldn't focus on her homework. Her mind kept wandering back to Shawn and his offer. She had been so sure of her stance before, so certain that he was just playing a game, that he was still the same person who had tormented her. But now there were cracks in the armor she had built around herself. She sat down on her bed, her sketchbook in front of her, the pages filled with drawings of things she didn't know how to express. Her pencil moved almost of its own accord as she sketched the oak tree again. But this time there was more. There was a figure beside the tree, sitting just next to the outline of a girl. The lines were uncertain, blurry even, but there was a softness to them that she hadn't expected. Lucy stopped drawing and stared at the page, her heart heavy with the conflicting emotions stirring inside her. Was this what it felt like to let someone in again? To take a chance, even when the past had shown her nothing but pain? The next day at school, the tension between her and Shawn was palpable. They hadn't spoken much since their conversation by the lockers, but every time their eyes met, there was something unspoken, something fragile. After school, Lucy was walking to her locker when she saw him standing by the exit. He wasn't with his usual group of friends, but by himself, looking almost out of place. She could see him fidgeting, his usual confidence replaced with something else. "Hey," he called, his voice unsure. Lucy stopped in her tracks, heart racing. "What is it, Shawn?" He glanced around as if gathering the courage to speak. "I just wanted to say thanks. For giving me a chance. Even if it's not much. I appreciate it." She could hear the sincerity in his voice, but still she hesitated. "You're welcome," she said quietly. "But I need more time. I can't just trust you overnight, Shawn." Shawn nodded, his eyes a little sad but understanding. "I know. And I'll wait. I hope one day you'll see that I'm not that person anymore." Lucy watched him walk away, her chest tightening. As much as she wanted to believe him, the walls were still there, protecting her from the hurt she wasn't ready to face. But deep down something was changing. The cracks in her armor were becoming wider, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop herself from wondering if Shawn might just be worth the risk. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions for Lucy. The walls she had so carefully built up were beginning to crumble, and with each interaction with Shawn, her heart teetered on the edge of trust and doubt. Her life had always been simple, quiet, predictable, and shielded. But now, as the weather grew warmer and the days stretched longer, things between them felt anything but simple. Shawn wasn't giving up on her. Even when she pushed him away, even when her responses were short, he kept trying. And despite her best efforts to maintain distance, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was pulling her toward him. She wasn't ready to admit it, not to herself and certainly not to anyone else. But deep down she could feel it. A flicker of hope, fragile but real. The bell rang, signaling the end of another school day. Lucy was walking to the exit when she noticed Shawn leaning against the brick wall by the doors, his hands shoved in his pockets, looking as though he had been waiting for her. She paused for a moment, hesitation curling in her chest. She had promised herself she would keep her distance today, but here he was, looking at her with that same intensity she had come to recognize. "Hey," he called, pushing off the wall and stepping toward her. Lucy took a deep breath, steeling herself. "What now, Shawn?" He smiled faintly. "Just thought I'd walk you home." Lucy raised an eyebrow, her surprise evident. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious in my life." Shawn's voice was steady, but there was an undertone of vulnerability in it that made her hesitate. "I've got nothing to prove except that I'm willing to show up. I'll walk you home if you'll let me." Lucy's mind raced. She didn't want to lead him on. She didn't want to make things more complicated than they already were. But at the same time, there was something about his sincerity that made her heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. "Fine," she said reluctantly. "But don't expect anything more than a quiet walk." Shawn grinned, nodding. "Quiet's fine. I just want to spend some time with you." The walk was silent at first. The kind of silence that felt like the calm before a storm. Lucy couldn't help but notice how close they were, how his presence seemed to fill every space between them. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the neighborhood, and the world felt suddenly smaller, as if it was just the two of them walking along the pavement, lost in their own thoughts. Shawn broke the silence first, his voice low but steady. "I know this is weird for you, but I just need you to know that I'm not doing this for any reason other than wanting to be better. For myself. And for you." Lucy glanced at him, her chest tight. "I don't need you to fix yourself for me, Shawn. I'm not asking for that." "I know," he replied quietly. "But I don't want to be the guy who hurt you anymore. I don't want to be that person. Not for you, not for anyone." There was an honesty in his voice that made her heart skip. She had heard apologies before. Empty ones, forced ones. But this felt different. She couldn't ignore it. "I don't know if I can just let go of everything that's happened," Lucy said softly, her gaze fixed on the ground ahead of them. "You've hurt me more than you know, Shawn. It's not just about forgetting. It's about trusting again. And that's not something I'm good at." Shawn didn't say anything for a moment, and for once, Lucy felt as if the silence between them wasn't awkward, but rather, understanding. "You don't have to trust me right away," he finally said. "But I'll wait. As long as it takes. I won't rush you into anything you're not ready for. But I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." His words hung in the air, and Lucy could feel the weight of them pressing down on her. The vulnerability in his voice struck a chord deep within her. He wasn't just asking for her forgiveness. He was asking for a chance. And for the first time she considered the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he deserved it. They arrived at her house a few minutes later, the sky now deepening into shades of purple and pink. Lucy stood in front of the door, her hand on the handle, unsure of what to say next. "Thanks for walking me home," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Shawn nodded, his expression softening. "Anytime, Lucy. Anytime." Before she could open the door, he stepped forward, his hand gently touching her arm. She froze, the electricity of his touch coursing through her veins. "I don't expect anything," he said, his voice barely audible. "But if you ever change your mind, I'll be here. I'll always be here." Lucy swallowed hard, her emotions a tangled mess. She wanted to say something, anything, to make sense of the storm swirling inside her. But she couldn't. Words felt too heavy, too final. So instead she nodded. "Good night, Shawn." He smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made her heart ache. "Good night, Lucy." As he walked away, Lucy stood there for a long time, staring after him. The door to her heart had cracked open just a little, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to walk through it yet. But the thought of it, of trusting again, of opening herself up, didn't feel as terrifying as it had before. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different between them. The days felt heavier after that evening. It wasn't that anything had drastically changed, but there was a shift, subtle yet undeniable. Lucy found herself thinking about Shawn more than she wanted to. Every moment of silence, every moment alone, his words echoed in her mind. "I'll wait. As long as it takes." The sincerity in his voice had settled deep within her. a seed of doubt and hope growing together. But hope, as she had learned, was fragile. Trust was something she had guarded for so long that letting it slip past her walls felt almost impossible. The shame, the guilt of having once been so vulnerable, made her question herself. That Friday afternoon, Lucy was walking to her locker when she noticed a note slipped into the crack of her locker door. She reached down, her curiosity piqued. Unfolding the piece of paper, she found it scrawled in Shawn's handwriting. "Meet me by the old oak tree at 4 p.m. I have something for you. No pressure, just come if you can." Lucy's heart skipped a beat. The oak tree. The one she had drawn so many times. The one that had become a symbol of something she wasn't sure she was ready to understand. Her fingers shook as she folded the note back up. There was a part of her that wanted to ignore it, to walk away, to keep things simple as they had always been. But there was another part, a part that couldn't deny the tug in her chest, urging her to go. When 4 p.m. rolled around, Lucy found herself walking toward the old oak tree, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. The air was cooler than usual, the sun already dipping low in the sky. She could see Shawn standing there, leaning against the trunk of the tree, hands in his pockets, looking at the ground as if lost in thought. As she approached, he looked up, a small, nervous smile on his face. "Hey." Lucy stopped a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest. "What's this about, Shawn?" He gestured to the space beside him, and she hesitated for a moment before walking over, standing just beside him though still keeping a distance. He exhaled softly, a slight frown tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I wanted to give you something," he said quietly, his gaze shifting down to his shoes before meeting her eyes again. "Something I should have done a long time ago." Lucy looked at him, puzzled. "What's going on, Shawn?" He pulled out a small worn notebook from his bag and handed it to her. "I've been carrying this around for a while. It's not much, but it's mine. My way of trying to figure things out. And I thought you might want to see it." Lucy took the notebook cautiously, her fingers brushing against his. It was simple, nothing more than a small black journal, the edges worn with time. She opened it slowly, revealing pages filled with sketches. Sketches of the oak tree. Of her. Of moments they had shared. Moments she hadn't realized had meant something to him. But it wasn't just the drawings that struck her. It was the words written beneath each one. The words were raw, unpolished, and filled with emotion. "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't know how to say it. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. Maybe I'm not as bad as I thought I was. But I want to be better for you." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she flipped through the pages. Each sketch, each line felt like a piece of the puzzle she had been too scared to look at. Shawn had been drawing her all this time, capturing moments she had never known existed. And in doing so he had shown her a side of him she never thought possible. She stopped at one drawing in particular. It was a sketch of her sitting beneath the oak tree, the setting sun casting long shadows. Her face was angled slightly downward, lost in thought. The caption below it read, "If I could, I would undo the hurt I've caused you." Lucy's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the weight of those words, the sincerity, the apology that hung between them. Shawn was standing quietly beside her, his eyes fixed on the ground, waiting for her response. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Lucy didn't know what to say. She had never expected this. Never expected him to be so open, so vulnerable. The Shawn she knew had always been guarded, always pushing people away. But this was different. "I didn't know," she faltered, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know any of this mattered to you." He finally turned to look at her, his expression softening. "I know I screwed up, Lucy. I know I hurt you more times than I can count. But I've been trying. Every day I've been trying to be better. For you. For me. And for the person I know I can be if you'll just let me show you." Lucy closed the notebook, her fingers trembling. She felt her heart pounding in her chest, the confusion, the hope, and the fear all crashing together in a storm of emotion. "I don't know if I can just forgive you, Shawn," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can trust you. You hurt me and I don't know how to forget that." Shawn nodded, the hurt clear in his eyes. "I don't expect you to forget. I don't even expect you to forgive me right away. But I need you to know that I'm not the same person I was before. I'll prove it to you. One day at a time." Lucy stared at the ground, unsure of how to respond. The pain was still there, lingering like a shadow she couldn't shake. But there was also something else. Something new, something fragile and beautiful that she wasn't ready to name yet. I can't promise anything, Shawn, she said softly, finally looking up at him. But I'm willing to try. Shawn's face broke into a tentative smile, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and gratitude. That's all I can ask for. They stood there in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. The sun had almost set completely, leaving behind only the faint glow of twilight. The oak tree stood as a silent witness to their conversation, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. For the first time, Lucy allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something new. Something different. And as they stood together beneath the oak tree, she realized that maybe, just maybe, Shawn had been telling the truth all along. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like there was a chance to walk it together. The following days were filled with a quiet tension that neither Shawn nor Lucy dared acknowledge directly. Things between them had shifted, but not enough for them to walk down a smooth path. It was more like walking through thick fog, each step feeling uncertain, but not entirely terrifying. Every now and then, their eyes would meet in the hallways at school, and it was as if time stood still for a brief moment, the world narrowing down to just the two of them. But when that moment passed, reality set in again. Lucy had her own demons to wrestle with. The shame, the insecurity, the fear of letting someone in again. Shawn had made it clear that he wanted to change to earn her trust. But what if she couldn't let go of the past? What if she couldn't see him for who he was now and kept seeing him for the boy who had tormented her? That Friday, Shawn pulled her aside after school again, this time in the parking lot. The soft hum of students rushing past them didn't faze either of them. His face was serious, a rare expression for someone who was always so effortlessly confident, always surrounded by people. But now, as he looked at her, there was no pretense, no bravado. Just Shawn, the boy she had known and the one she was slowly beginning to understand. "Lucy," he began, his voice steady but filled with an emotion that made her heart flutter uneasily. "I've been thinking. I don't want to push you into anything. I don't want you to feel trapped. But if we're going to try this, if we're going to make something of this, I need to know something." Lucy's breath caught in her throat. "What?" He took a small step closer to her, his gaze softening. "I need to know that you're not holding back because of what I did. I need to know that you're not shutting me out because you're scared. I need to know if you feel anything at all, even a little bit." She looked away, the weight of his question pressing down on her chest. She didn't want to lie. But she didn't want to admit the truth either. Because the truth was too complicated. Too dangerous. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know if I'm ready to feel anything." "Lucy." "Shawn, I'm not trying to hurt you," she cut him off, her voice trembling. "But it's not just about what you've done to me. It's about me. About me learning to trust again. I don't know how to do that." The silence between them hung heavy. Shawn's eyes darkened with the weight of her words. He looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, Lucy saw the raw vulnerability in him. Not the arrogance, not the confidence, but the real, honest Shawn. "I can't make you trust me," he said quietly. "But I'll be here. Even if you don't feel ready yet. Even if it takes time." Lucy swallowed hard, feeling the sting of tears threatening to break free. It wasn't just him she had to fight. It was herself. The walls she had built up over the years were starting to feel suffocating. But breaking them down was terrifying. Could she really do it? Could she let him in again? "I don't know if I can," she whispered. Shawn's expression softened and he stepped back, giving her the space she needed. "I won't rush you, Lucy. I'll wait. Just don't shut me out completely, okay?" She nodded, unable to say anything more. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time she didn't feel entirely lost in it. The following week, Lucy tried to push herself to be more open, but old habits were hard to break. She didn't seek out Shawn. Instead, he always seemed to find a way to be near her. In the library, during lunch, even in the hallways when she thought she could hide in the crowd. But every time they spoke, it was different. Calmer, less confrontational, more honest. She could see the effort he was putting in, and it both comforted and scared her. One afternoon after school, she was sitting on the steps outside the school building, staring into the distance, lost in thought. She hadn't realized Shawn had joined her until he spoke. "Thinking about it again?" Lucy looked up, startled. "What?" "Us," he said with a half smile. "You've been thinking about us, haven't you?" Her heart skipped. She hadn't meant for him to notice, hadn't meant to make it so obvious. I don't know what to think, she admitted, her voice small. I want to believe that things can change. That we can change. But I'm not sure I'm ready for all of it. Shawn sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. But his presence was enough to make her feel like she wasn't alone. I get it, he said softly. It's a lot to take in. I can't change everything overnight. I can't undo the past. But I can show you who I am now. And who I want to be. Lucy turned to look at him, her breath catching in her throat. And who is that, Shawn? He smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. Someone who's trying to do better. Someone who's trying to be worthy of your trust. Someone who doesn't want to hurt you anymore. She swallowed, unsure of how to respond. The sincerity in his voice, the openness. It was all so foreign to her. Could she allow herself to believe in it? I don't know how to trust again, she whispered. I don't know if I ever will. Shawn turned to face her fully, his expression resolute. You don't have to trust me right now. You just have to know that I'm not going anywhere. And I'll be here when you're ready. The weight of his words settled on her chest like a soft burden. For the first time, she didn't feel completely afraid of what the future might hold. Maybe the path ahead wouldn't be so tangled after all. The days seemed to blur together in a haze of conflicting emotions. The brief moments of peace Lucy had found within herself were often interrupted by the waves of uncertainty that came crashing back in. There were times when she thought she could do it, that she could let Shawn in, that she could trust him. And then there were moments when the fear of being hurt again overwhelmed her, sending her retreating back into her shell. She wasn't the only one struggling. Shawn too seemed to be fighting an internal battle. The facade of the bad boy, the one who didn't care, was beginning to crumble in front of her eyes. There were no more arrogant smiles, no more acts of defiance against the world. In their place was vulnerability, a side of him she hadn't seen before. It was on a Thursday afternoon, just a few days after their heart-to-heart outside the school, when everything came to a head. Lucy had spent the entire day trying to focus on her assignments, trying to distract herself from the constant thoughts of Shawn. But as the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. She stood from her desk and walked toward the door, her heart beating a little faster than usual. As she stepped into the hallway, she saw him. Shawn was standing at the end of the corridor, his back against the lockers, arms crossed. There was something different about his posture today, something tense, like he was holding back. And when their eyes met, it was as if everything in the room stopped. Lucy froze in place, unable to look away. He pushed himself off the lockers and began walking toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. She couldn't read his expression. There was a storm brewing behind his gaze, but she couldn't figure out if it was directed at her or if it was something else entirely. She stood still, unsure whether to move forward or retreat. Lucy, he said, his voice low and almost unrecognizable. We need to talk. Her stomach dropped at the seriousness in his tone. She had heard those words before, we need to talk, and it never led to anything good. But this time, something in his voice made her stomach twist in a way that was unfamiliar, yet strangely compelling. About what? She asked, her voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. He paused a few feet away as though giving her space. But his eyes were intense, almost desperate, and it unsettled her. About everything, he said. About us. She swallowed, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within her. I thought we already talked. Not really, Shawn replied, running a hand through his hair. I've been doing a lot of thinking and I realized something. I don't know how to say this, but here goes. I'm falling for you, Lucy. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and unexpected. Lucy's breath caught in her throat. Falling for her? She had known he had feelings for her. She could see it in his actions, the way he was always around, always trying to get closer. But hearing him say it out loud, it shook her to her core. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words refused to come. Instead, she just stared at him, the confusion and fear evident in her eyes. I know, he continued, his voice breaking the silence. This isn't easy. I've hurt you. I know that. And I've been an idiot about it for far too long. But I can't keep pretending like it's not eating me up inside. I don't want to be that guy anymore. The guy who hurts people. The guy who hides behind jokes and attitude. I want to be the guy who makes things right. Lucy's mind raced, her thoughts swirling in a whirlwind of emotions. She had been so focused on protecting herself, on keeping her heart locked away, that she hadn't allowed herself to truly consider what might be between them. And now, with Shawn's confession hanging in the air, she was left standing at the precipice of something she wasn't sure she was ready to jump into. "I don't know if I can do this, Shawn," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if I'm ready to be, whatever this is." "I'm not asking you to jump in head first," Shawn said, his voice calm but urgent. "I'm just asking you to give me a chance. I can't change the past, but I can show you who I am now. Who I want to be with you." Lucy's chest tightened. Every fiber of her being screamed to pull away, to shut him out, to run far from the fear and pain that lurked beneath the surface. But there was something about him, something about the raw honesty in his eyes, that kept her rooted in place. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was being manipulated or controlled. She just felt seen. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can let myself feel again." Shawn stepped closer, the distance between them closing, but he stopped just shy of reaching out to her. His eyes softened as he spoke. "You don't have to feel anything right now. But I'm here. And I'll be here for as long as it takes." A long silence passed between them, both of them trying to navigate the weight of the moment. Shawn was waiting, hoping, praying that Lucy would give him the smallest sign that she was willing to try. And for the first time in a long while, Lucy didn't feel like she was standing at the edge of a cliff ready to fall. She felt like she was standing on solid ground, still uncertain, still scared, but not completely alone. She took a shaky breath and finally looked up at him. "I'm not sure what's going to happen, Shawn. But I'm willing to find out." A relieved smile broke across his face, and for a moment, Lucy saw the boy he could be. The boy who was vulnerable, who was trying. He reached out slowly, cautiously, as though waiting for her to pull away. But Lucy didn't move. She stood still, letting him close the gap, letting him touch her for the first time in a way that wasn't tainted by the past. And when his hand gently touched hers, it wasn't the fireworks she had expected, but a quiet understanding. The beginning of something fragile but real. The tension that had defined their relationship for so long was slowly beginning to fade, replaced by something new, something uncertain but with the potential to grow into something beautiful. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But for the first time they were both standing on the same ground, taking the first step toward healing. And that for now was enough. The days after Shawn's confession felt like both a weight lifting and a new burden settling in. Lucy found herself oscillating between moments of hope and waves of self-doubt. It was the first time in years that someone had made her feel like she was worth something more than the invisible girl hiding behind the shadows. But the old patterns, the scars from the past, didn't disappear overnight. She had never been one to let her guard down, and the thought of doing so now with someone who had once tormented her was terrifying. Still, the small gestures from Shawn, the thoughtful texts, the way he would wait for her after class, the way he never pushed her too hard, made her heart ache in a way she couldn't ignore. One afternoon, Lucy was sitting alone in the school courtyard, trying to concentrate on her biology homework. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the concrete. Her thoughts were scattered, her focus waning as the soft breeze brushed against her skin. She could feel it coming, the shift. The change that was slowly creeping in, threatening to undo all the walls she had worked so hard to build. Shawn had been different lately. He wasn't the same arrogant, self-assured boy who used to taunt her. He was more reserved, more careful with his words, and even when they spoke, there was an undeniable tenderness in his voice. But the fear that still clung to her like a second skin didn't fade. She was constantly asking herself, "Is this real? Or am I just fooling myself again?" Her thoughts were interrupted when she felt a presence beside her. She looked up to find Shawn standing there, his expression soft but serious. "Hey," he said, his voice warm but with an edge of hesitation. "Mind if I sit?" Lucy nodded slowly, unsure of what he wanted. She didn't speak, letting the silence settle between them. Shawn sat down beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. His usual confident demeanor was replaced with an unspoken understanding. He wasn't pushing her, he wasn't demanding anything from her. He was simply there. After a few minutes he finally spoke, breaking the stillness. "Lucy, I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he started, his voice careful. "About how you're not sure if you can let yourself feel again. And I get it. I know I've hurt you, and I know it's not going to be easy to just flip a switch and pretend like everything's fine." Lucy's heart clenched. The guilt, the fear, the constant battle inside her, he could see it even when she tried to hide it. She had never been good at letting people in, but somehow Shawn seemed to understand her in a way no one else ever had. I don't expect you to just forget everything, he continued. I just want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to push you into anything. But I want you to know that when you're ready, I'll be here. Lucy looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of insincerity, but all she found was earnestness. It was as though he had laid himself bare in front of her, vulnerable and raw. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the hesitation in the way he spoke. And yet, beneath it all, there was a quiet strength. I don't know if I'm ready for anything, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't even know if I can trust you fully. Shawn's gaze softened. I don't expect you to. But I'm willing to prove it to you. Slowly, if that's what it takes. I don't want to lose you, Lucy. The words hung in the air and Lucy felt her heart pound in her chest. She had spent so long running, so long hiding from the world, that she hadn't realized how much she had needed someone like Shawn. Not the arrogant boy who thought he could do whatever he wanted, but the real person beneath all the bravado. The one who was willing to stand by her side even when things got messy. For the first time in a long while, Lucy allowed herself to feel something other than fear. A flicker of hope, small but bright, ignited inside her. It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't the end of the road. But it was a step forward. I'm scared, she admitted softly, her voice trembling. I'm scared that I'll let myself trust you and then you'll leave. That I'll fall for you and you'll break me again. Shawn's expression turned serious and he reached out, gently placing his hand on hers. It was a simple gesture, but to Lucy, it felt like an unspoken promise. I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly. I swear to you I'm not going to hurt you again. You don't have to do anything right now. We take it one day at a time. But I'll be here. Every step of the way. Lucy's breath caught in her throat, her eyes meeting his. It was the first time in so long that someone had made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could trust again. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the fairy tale she had dreamed of. But it was real. And for now that was enough. Over the next few weeks, their relationship continued to grow. Tentatively, slowly but steadily. Shawn never pressured her to move faster than she was ready for. He let her take the lead, and when she needed space he gave it to her without question. The walls around her heart were still there, but each time Shawn showed her that he cared, those walls weakened just a little more. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when Lucy wondered if this was all a mistake. But with each passing day she found herself opening up to him more, finding comfort in the way he listened, in the way he respected her boundaries, in the way he made her feel like she was worth fighting for. One evening, as they sat together on the steps outside her house, watching the sunset, Lucy finally let her guard down enough to speak what had been in her heart for so long. Shawn, she began, her voice quiet but steady. I'm not sure where this is going. But I don't want to push you away anymore. I don't want to be afraid anymore. I'm willing to give this a chance, with you. Shawn's eyes softened and for a moment he didn't say anything. He just smiled, genuinely without any arrogance or pretension, and squeezed her hand gently. You don't have to have it all figured out, he replied. We'll figure it out together. In that moment Lucy knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be obstacles, moments of doubt, and times when they both faltered. But for the first time she felt like she was no longer walking alone. He was taking a chance. A leap of faith. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like the end of the world. It felt like the beginning of something new. Something worth fighting for. Together they had begun to break free from the chains of the past. And in doing so they had created the possibility for something better. Something real. The morning air was crisp and the world felt quieter than usual. Lucy stood in front of her bedroom mirror, carefully adjusting her clothes, smoothing out the edges of the uncertainty that had once defined her every move. It had been a month since the day Shawn had confessed his feelings for her, and since then, everything had shifted. The walls she had spent years building around her heart were crumbling, not with the force of a storm, but gently like the slow, steady erosion of time. Today was different. She ran a hand through her hair, taking in the reflection that no longer seemed like the girl she had once been. She looked more at peace, less guarded, more open. She was finally starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, happiness didn't have to feel like an impossible dream. Shawn had become an anchor in her life, but not the kind of anchor that weighed her down. He had become a presence that held her steady, helping her navigate the stormy seas of her past. Slowly but surely, the boy who had once tormented her with his words and actions had transformed into someone who was learning how to love her. Not just in words but in actions, in patience, in understanding. They had spent hours talking late into the night, sharing stories of their childhood, their fears, their insecurities. Every conversation felt like peeling back another layer of themselves. And each time, Shawn never hesitated to show vulnerability, to show that he was human just like her. He wasn't perfect and neither was she. But together they were creating something new. A bond that wasn't built on expectations but on a shared understanding. Today, though, felt like a turning point. Today was the day of the school's spring formal. It had been weeks in the making, and while many students were excited, Lucy had always avoided events like these. She had convinced herself that she didn't belong in those spaces, that she wasn't worthy of standing out, of being noticed. But this time something felt different. This time she wanted to take a step forward, not just for herself but with Shawn. Shawn had asked her to go to the dance with him, his voice tentative but filled with sincerity. "I want to take you somewhere special. We can just go, no pressure. But I want to go with you. Please." For the first time, Lucy had said yes without overthinking it. She had said yes because she was learning to trust herself again. She was learning to trust him. The evening arrived quickly. Lucy stood in front of her mirror one last time before stepping out of her room. Her dress was simple but elegant. A soft, flowing lavender gown that accentuated her features without drawing too much attention. She had always shied away from standing out, but tonight felt different. Tonight she wasn't hiding. Tonight she was allowing herself to be seen. When she arrived at the venue, the gymnasium had been transformed into something straight out of a fairy tale. Twinkling lights lined the walls and a soft hum of music filled the air, creating a sense of excitement that Lucy had never fully experienced. She stood at the entrance for a moment, taking it all in, before her gaze drifted to the doorway where Shawn was waiting. He was standing by the side, dressed in a sleek black suit, his hair neatly styled. The moment he saw her, his face softened. For the briefest of seconds, everything around them seemed to fade. It was just the two of them, and in that moment Lucy felt a warmth in her chest. A warmth that told her she was exactly where she needed to be. Shawn's eyes flickered up and down her form before he grinned. A genuine smile, the kind she had never seen before. "Wow," he said softly. "You look amazing." Lucy blushed, not used to receiving such compliments, especially from someone like Shawn. She smiled shyly, feeling the flutter of excitement in her stomach. "Thanks," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He offered her his arm, a soft chuckle escaping his lips as he led her inside. "Ready for this?" Lucy took a deep breath. She had always feared being in the spotlight, but tonight she felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. It wasn't the grand, dramatic hope of a storybook romance, but a quiet, steady hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something real. The night unfolded with moments of laughter, moments of joy, and moments of raw honesty. They danced, they talked, and for the first time in a long while, Lucy didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like she belonged. As the night wore on, Shawn pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her back as they swayed to the slow song playing in the background. She felt his warmth, the steady rhythm of his heart beating in time with hers. "I've been thinking," Shawn said softly, his voice low as he leaned in closer. "I know we've had our ups and downs, and I know it hasn't been easy. But I'm not going anywhere, Lucy. Not now. Not ever." Lucy looked up at him, her heart in her throat. For the first time she realized that she believed him. She believed in him. "I don't know what's ahead," she whispered, her breath catching. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this goes with you." Shawn smiled, his eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and affection. "That's all I've ever wanted." And in that moment Lucy felt like she was finally free. Free from the chains of her past, free from the fear of being hurt again, and free to embrace what was in front of her. As the night drew to a close, Lucy found herself walking outside with Shawn, the cool night air brushing against her cheeks. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars twinkle above them. Shawn turned to her, his expression serious but warm. "I never thought I'd get to do this, to be with you like this. I don't know what I was expecting when I first saw you, but I'm glad it's you." Lucy smiled softly. "Me too." They stood there together as the world seemed to move on around them. In that moment the future felt wide open. The road ahead was still uncertain, still filled with challenges and doubts. But for the first time in a long time, Lucy didn't feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. She felt light, like she could finally breathe. And with Shawn by her side, she knew that no matter what came next, she wouldn't have to face it alone. It wasn't the perfect ending, nor was it the end of their story. But it was a new beginning. A beginning where both Lucy and Shawn had the chance to heal, to grow, and to love in a way they never thought possible. And that, for them both, was everything.